Right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to members and to the public for this meeting of the Thirsk and Malton Area Planning Committee. Please, can I remind everyone that today's meeting is being recorded and filmed and will be made publicly available on the website. Can I remind you just to make sure that your phones are either switched off or on silent also? Thank you. Toilets, of course, are located in the corridor behind you in front of me. I'm not aware of a fire alarm practice being expected this afternoon or today. So if the fire alarm does sound, please exit the building via the fire escapes and gather in the car park at the front of the offices. So that's the housekeeping bits taken care of. We've got no apologies for absence, so we've got a full complement, so that's really good. Minutes of the last meeting, these have been circulated to members. Is everybody happy with the minutes? Moved, seconded, thank you very much. Are we happy with them? Can we take them by general affirmation? Yeah, thank you. Declarations of interest. Does anybody have any declarations of interest? No, thank you very much. So we'll move on to item 4, which is the application ZB 2401642/full. Demolition of existing buildings, extension of bank for retail use, construction of 2 flats and signage at the former Barclays building, 24 Marketplace, Thirsk. Just before I ask the case officer to present the report, we do have a number of speakers this morning. We have an objector, we have the divisional member, and we've got the agent as well. So sorry, so they'll each get, are we still on 3 minutes or 5 minutes? It's 5 minutes, beg your pardon, 5 minutes to speak. And so with that, I'll ask Connor to present, if it's Connor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. So before we get going, there are a number of updates to provide. You'll be able to see from the update list that the agent provided a relatively lengthy response to the recommendation for refusal. Amongst other things, it discusses the relationship between the proposal and the conservation area and the built environment around it. It also outlines the reasons for the proposed design and the extent of the design, and gives a bit more background to the application. There is an officer response following that, where the issues raised within the agent's response are responded to. This primarily revolves around the burgage plots and the relationship between the site, the development, and the surrounding properties. It also discusses how harm is assessed for a heritage asset with a emphasis on that precedent doesn't necessarily exist. It's whether the application is harmful or not, and it's for the council to weigh the positives against the negatives if harm is identified. Another matter is that the figure given for full-time employees differs from that given within the application form. So within the update, it states that between 25 and 35 members of staff could be, or jobs, sorry, could be created as a result of this development. That differs from what was outlined within the application form, which was 24, 12 full-time, 12 part-time, so 18 full-time equivalent roles. I can't see that there's any documentation within the submission to ratify either number. There was a further response from the agent with regards to the nationally described space standard. I have had a measure up to respond to that. So it is true that the smaller flat referenced originally within the reason for refusal is now regarded as being NDSS, 62 square meters. The requirement is 61 square meters. However, further measurement has indicated that the other flat is just under NDSS by half a square meter. And additionally, that the bedrooms fail to meet the technical requirements C, D, and E relating to minimum widths of bedrooms. Again, very small margins. We're talking between 5 and 15 centimeters. But it's made, the point is made within the officer response that these are minimums and should be achieved at all times in order to achieve compliance with the local plan and with NDSS. Should be pointed out that the small flat does fall within NDSS, and that reason 3 relating to refusal should be altered in order to reflect this. There was also an additional plan provided by the agent on the 14th of March, identifying the built form within the burgage plots. The officer response is that the supply plan is overly simplistic, with no variation in levels taken into account, which, as discussed in the officer response above, aids the legibility of those burgage plots. The plan shows that the scale of development proposed is beyond what is present in the area, with other development of a similar scale being, with the only other development of a similar scale being the warehouse adjacent, which then does not fill the entire plot. In terms of verbal updates, we obviously have the amendment to reason 3 relating to NDSS, which is still in place, but should be reworded in order to reflect the reassessment of the flats. In addition, within the report, paragraph 1021, there's a reference to MPPF paragraph 216, which should be 212. Also within the updates, there is reference to the conservation officer, which isn't in the report. I confirm that discussion with the conservation officer was performed on a relatively ad hoc basis, and so we haven't had a formal response. So just to clarify there. Next slide, please. Thank you. This application is for the demolition of existing buildings, the extension of a bank for retail use, and the construction of 2 flats and signage. It should be noted that signage will be mainly considered through an advert application, which presumably would follow a successful permission. The site is set within Thirsk town centre. The bulk of the site is covered by the designated town centre, whilst the entirety of the site is within the Thirsk and Selby conservation areas and Article 4 areas. The designated town centre and development within it is covered by policy E3, and support is given to retail developments within the designated town centre. The caveat is that it has to respect or be seen to respect character or the prevailing character of the area. The site runs from north to south, providing frontages to both Marketplace and Chapel Street. The key policy consideration in terms of the principle is S7 and E5, both of which cover heritage and which discuss the Council's approach to the impact of development on heritage assets within the former Malton area. The policies discourage development where that development causes harm that cannot be outweighed by a public benefit. In this case, the policy context applies to both the design of the proposed development, but also its relationship to surrounding development, which is dominated by the presence of a medieval burgage plot system. The system can be seen throughout Thirsk's historic core, predominating within the town centre. It is therefore considered to be central to the urban character of Thirsk. Burgage plots relate to the medieval splitting of sites within a town by a landowner seeking to maximise rents through the production of long plots that were then rented to individuals within that town and are a feature of settlements with a significant medieval past, just in case, or just to clarify what burgage plots actually are. Other considerations include the relationship of the property to neighbouring residences, namely number 8 Chapel Street. Other residences impacted by the proposal include 1 to 7 Steads Yard, which are northwest of the site, running north to south, and 19 Chapel Street, which is the small building or the small dwelling, sorry, to the southeast of the site. Less than substantial harm has been identified, so moderate less than substantial harm, with the chief public benefit being the provision of jobs and the reuse of a disused building within the town centre. However, whilst this constitutes a viable use, it has not been demonstrated that this is an optimum viable use, and so it's considered that it isn't an overwhelming public benefit, and that the proposal does not necessarily make use of the site context, or full use of the site context. Next slide, sorry. So this is the broader context of Thirsk's centre. So as you can see, arranged around the marketplace, you can see these long, thin plots, all of which are burgage plots. So it is very much part of that character of the town, and continues northwards along Kirkgate. Next slide, sorry. So this shows the existing and proposed site layout. As you can see, the site is largely undeveloped, with only limited extension of the former bank building to the north. To the south of the site is a small building, which, according to historic maps, was unrelated to that historic use of the building as a bank, but which may relate to the building which preceded the bank. The proposed site layout to the right shows the extent of the development. The extension provides an additional 545, approximately 545 square metres of ground floor space, taking the total up to 783 metres squared on the ground floor. The proposed development consists of a single-storey element, which forms the bulk of the proposal, with a two-storey element at the southern end of the extension, which includes the two flats. As you can see, the proposed development takes up almost the entirety of the plot, with a 6-metre gap between the extension and the highway left to accommodate deliveries, waste storage associated with the business and the flats, etc. Next slide, sorry. So this slide shows the built context of Northern Chapel Street, and this is the, in case it hasn't been seen, this is the plan that was supplied by the agent and referenced within the updates. So whilst development appears to be extensive, the plan doesn't show the alterations in levels which provide part of that visual context of burgage plot, and which contribute significantly to the character of the area. The vast majority of what can be seen there actually consists of step development, so development with single-storey, two-storey elements, and which more importantly allows for views through to the principal buildings within the plots, which invariably front towards the marketplace. Where this isn't the case, such as with the adjacent warehouse to the west, that permeable character is carried through instead in a physical fashion, so you can walk through the yard between Marketplace and Chapel Street. The level of infill means that this isn't considered to be the case here, where both the physical and visual experience of that historical layout will be totally obscured by the development. Next slide, sir. So this shows the current arrangement. As you can see, the stepped multi-level arrangement of both the current site and, to an extent, the neighbouring plots adds to that character and cleave to that character that has already been discussed. Next slide, sorry. So this shows a section showing the height of the single-storey element and the elevation from Chapel Street. As can be seen, the visual context of the site and the character identified above is totally obscured by the two-storey element at the end of the proposed extension, which is shown to the top right of the slide. The slide also demonstrates elements which are considered to be contrary to the character of the area, i.e. the doors and windows. However, it's considered that these can be managed via condition. Just whilst we're on this slide, so you can see the section there showing the single-storey height of the single-storey there. Stead's Yard does have a number of windows running parallel to this site. They won't be obscured by the height of the development. They will look out onto the sheet roofing, which is going to form this part of the proposal, but they serve bathrooms, so they're considered to be tertiary, and this loss of outlook isn't necessarily considered to be to carry any weight, really. The proposed materials are aluminium windows, pantile roof, and brick for the rear two-story element. Next slide, sir. So this floor plan has been amended to more clearly show the extent of the alterations. You can see I've put in some thick black lines there. The bulk of the proposed floor space is to be given over to retail use, with a minor element to the south consisting of the areas for deliveries and staff amenity, as well as access to the flats above. Next slide, sir. So this shows the floor space associated with the flats. Whilst the margins are slim, as discussed during the update, the proposed units do not comply with NDSS when measured up. Unit 2 measures at 69.5 meters squared, as opposed to 70, and the bedrooms are not considered to be of an appropriate width to meet the NDSS requirements. Again, the figures are very slight, and it should be noted that the NDSS constitutes a minimum standard, so an inability to meet that, even if the gap between fulfillment and not is limited, should still be noted. And again, it's considered that allowances could be made for margin of error, and that if required, an amended plan showing clearly the proposed internal dimensions of the room and overall floor space may address some of these concerns. In terms of the weighting, the units are the sort of units that we would, generally speaking, be looking for in terms of how they, in terms of our requirements for two-bedroom properties. But due to the fact it doesn't meet NDSS, or is considered not to meet to NDSS, limited weight has been given to this at the moment. Whilst we were on site, I think there was some discussion around the vibrancy of the town centre and the encouragement of residences within the town centre in order to keep that buzz going, which again is supported via planning policy, so policy EG5. Again, the caveat is that any development has to respect the character or the overwhelming character of the area, which obviously this isn't considered to do. A further consideration is the impact on the proposal of the outlook on number 8 Chapel Street. Oh, sorry, next slide, sorry. Thank you. So the distance between the two-story element and number 8 is around 17 square meters. However, the height of the proposed two-story element, which is 9.1 meters, would make it among the taller buildings along the north side of Chapel Street, and would, due to the fact it stretches the width of the plot, would limit the outlook from number 8. This effect would be made more so by the presence of the large warehouse to the west and by number 10 to the east. So it would form a large a large developed outlook, essentially. It's considered that the 6 meter setback from the highway does limit this to a very, very slight extent, but that it's not far away enough to limit the sheer scale of the development, which again is relatively alien within Chapel Street. Next slide, sorry. Thank you. So this is the site looking north, and I will have to apologise. I do have a wealth of site photos, but as you might pick out during the course of this, for whatever reason, I couldn't get the various bits of technology to work, so I've had to use Google Street View. So these images are from September 2018, but they do very little's changed on the site, and they do illustrate the site and its surroundings, etc., as well as my site photos. So this is the site looking north, showing the site as viewed from Chapel Street, and we are effectively to the side of number 8 there. So as you can imagine, a building which is, I believe, taller than the warehouse and which stretches the entire site is going to have a reasonable visual impact there. with the view being almost entirely filled by filled with development. Next slide, sorry. So this shows the existing relationship from the area. This is taken from the back of the bank building. Those windows I've mentioned serving Stead's Yard can be seen on the right. I think there's been some discussion with the landowner next door about who is responsible for maintenance, etc., etc. It's considered that this isn't necessarily a planning matter, and that's a matter for agreement between that landowner and the current landowner for this site. Next slide. Thank you. So this again shows the existing development here. So as you can see, there is a reasonable amount of development to the rear, but you can see the different levels there. You can see that there's views through the step in, and the various forms of development allow for views through the site. So you can still see that Market Street frontage. Next slide, sorry. So this is further to the east, but still on Chapel Street. So you can see the linear development there, both expressed through boundary treatments, walls, etc., but also through the various buildings there. And you can see that we've got buildings of different sizes, scales. You can see Marketplace in the background, and you can see that it's a very strong pattern of development there. Next slide, sir. Oh, sorry, thanks. You anticipated. Yeah. So this is a well-preserved example of the traditional arrangement with development on the boundary line. So again, you can see we've got the main building fronting Market Street, development off the back of that, development following the boundary line, all stepped, all incorporating traditional materials, etc., etc. So this is an exemplar, really, of burgage plot development. And this slide. So again, you'll notice that it's no longer a Barclays. The sole change really is going to be the affixing of signage to reflect the new business to the front. Otherwise, it will be wholly unchanged. Thank you.
Yeah, just a small correction in paragraph 6.4 of the report, reference to the National Planning Policy Framework 2021. It should be the 12th of December 2024. There was an update further to that in February this year, but it doesn't constitute a change to the policy overall, just a slight amendment for the avoidance of doubt. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, so unusually we're going to ask for questions from members, and then we're going to have the speakers. So I open it up for questions from members.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a number of questions. The first one is around the National Space Standards matter that you referred to in your report. And this is quite obviously an important matter for us as a committee. You referred to the fact that whilst one of the flats is within half a square metre, I think you said outside, but you did refer to some tolerance or some sort of, can you just explain what that gives us and what as a committee we can consider in terms of tolerances around that, given that this is quite an important issue?
So the tolerance isn't a feature of policy, but rather when you're measuring up, particularly when you're using electronic measuring systems, it's not. It's sometimes can be difficult to get an exact measurement. So when you're dealing with very small margins, then you tend to give some degree of tolerance. I will say that I've measured this, and measured this again. So I'm relatively certain that it will fall just below, but I think in the interest of fairness, I think it's reasonable to say that if they can demonstrate compliance through the provision of written dimensions on a plan, then that's an appropriate line to take. Oh, just to add, but for all intents and purposes, at present, the officer opinion is that it doesn't hit NDSS.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask a second question here, unrelated? Just in relation, obviously, the conservation area, which obviously there's a lot of weight being placed on that. One of the issues that came out from the site visit was there's going to be aluminium windows placed in the building, which seemed a little bit sort of contradictory in terms of we're trying to preserve the conservation zone, and yet we're going for aluminium windows. Has there been any sort of update in relation to that?
No, there hasn't. But I think the prevailing feeling, having discussions with informal discussions with the agent following the site visit, is it's the sort of thing that, if required, could be conditioned. Things like window details, door details, that sort of thing.
Councillor Burr.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to follow on from Councillor Napton about the 61 square metres. Is that actually for the dwelling? Is it actually for any dwelling, or is it because it's a 2-bed? Would a difference of a 1-bed make any difference, or is that the minimum requirements, whether it be a 1-bed or a 2-bed?
So the NDSS is a sliding scales based on the number of bedrooms and then the number of expected people using the unit. So, for instance, and also the number of stories within the unit as well. So it's, in this case, it's I think 61 square meters due to the fact that it's a 2-bed 3-person house. So we've got 1 double bedroom and 1 single bedroom, which confirms that.
1-bed, then it could be made possible, because obviously it wouldn't be for 3 persons.
Yeah, that's entirely possible. Then it would be in excess of, as it is at the moment, that smaller unit, it would be in excess of the NDSS requirements.
Just on that specific point, so it's something that we as officers over this last few years have kind of tried to get to grips with, this whole concept of how big is the room, could you access the room in a different way, could you split the room in 2, applying a little bit of kind of pragmatism, I suppose, to it, but also common sense in terms of the likely outcomes. Clearly we have had developers who will come in claiming one thing and then we'll see it being marketed as another. And I'm not suggesting for one second that's the case here. I suppose it's just to be live to the fact that in that scenario, if we were to say, it would be a 1-bed unit instead of a 2, the likelihood is it'll get subdivided into to be a 2, simply because the amount of footprint that's there and the accessibility to the site.
I just come back on that comment. Not all developers will, totally do what they want with their planning application. And I don't think that we should say that, because obviously if that does come about, that can be reported and done by the proper way. So I'm assuming that everyone will continue. If they get a planning permission for 1, it's 1. If they get a planning permission for 2, it's 2.
All I'm saying is that when we've been looking at plans for different types of units, whether it's NDSS or whether it's compliance in terms of the supplementary planning guidance in terms of the size of units, we're live to the issues that they raise.
Councillor Baker.
There is no provision in this application for any parking spaces for the people that will be employed in the above what was the bank building and in these 2 residential units. And I don't know if that is a planning issue or something we should be aware of. And I know the argument could be that they will walk to work, but I guess looking at the pictures we've shown, there were about 7 or 8 cars parked in that area originally. So presumably there'll be more vehicles, parking places needed.
So the development will result in the loss of 20 parking spaces associated with the former bank. The general approach within town centre locations, particularly Thirsk and Malton, as they're quite well connected in terms of public transport, is that that people should be able to get to work without necessarily needing to drive there. Highways, for that reason, tend not to object to these sorts of developments on that basis, both residential and retail. I mean, it did come up within the representations. An objector stated that parking on Chapel Street is tight and busy and limited, and expressed a concern there. But in terms of the actual planning balance, the feeling is that the site can, by virtue of being in the middle of Thirsk, accommodate staff appropriately. I mean, to go back to the difficulty lies really in going back to the updates where the agent stated that there could be 25 to 35 jobs created as part of this, but in doing so suggested that there'll be delivery drivers, there'll be regional managers, etc., attending. So there is a question as to where they might park during the course of it, but the answer could well be in Thirsk Town Centre, and then they'll recoup that from the public parking.
Councillor Napton.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. What I failed to notice on the site visit on Monday, but I can see sort of in the picture there is with the small yellow sign. What are the parking restrictions in the street at the moment? I think I see a single yellow line there, but it's not clear.
So it is a single yellow line. I think it's no parking between a time and another time. So I think my experience of Chapel Street over many years is that it is somewhere where you wouldn't park on the highway. You'd try and either park, as I did on Monday, actually in the site if you're performing a site visit, or alternatively you would park in Marketplace or the leisure centre if required.
Thank you.
It helps. I think it says restricted between 8 AM and 6:30 PM.
Questions? I know we've covered the NDSS, but these are a minimum standard. These are the very minimum that we need to provide. And whilst I accept it's very useful to have 2 units, we need to make sure that they are good, livable accommodation. So what can we do to improve the offer, if anything?
I mean, as I say, as a basic approach, we can seek to ensure that NDSS is met through just the alteration of the plan to demonstrate in black and white this measurement relates to this measurement relates to this, and then we would hit NDSS. I mean, at its most basic, the response is make them slightly bigger. But I think in terms of this current application, just ensuring that they are NDSS would be just an amendment to the plan.
Sorry, Sam. Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Chair. I think what we really want here as far as NDS is we want it conditioned that there should be 1-bedroom flats rather than 2-bedroom flats. I think what we should be aiming for is getting quality accommodation, not, you know what I mean, bug hutches, you know, rabbit hutches, you know what I mean? And that should be, we went through this, we have a lot of, in Scarborough, we have lots of properties that have been converted to flats, and we were keen that they were greater than NDSS. You know what I mean? We shouldn't be looking at for the minimum. We should be looking for the best. You know what I mean? And that's where we should be coming from. So if we could condition it, we should be conditioning the big 1-bedroom flats. Thank you, Chair.
Anybody, any other questions? Because I've got a host of questions. Sorry, I'm going to be a real pain. Sorry, sorry. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm slightly concerned. We have an application before us, which is for, it's set out in the terms that it's set out. I would be slightly concerned about trying to limit the accommodation by condition. I think under those circumstances, if members were minded that the scheme is otherwise satisfactory and were otherwise minded to support the proposals, my recommendation at that point would be to defer it for further correspondence with the applicant. Clearly it changes the scheme, it changes the viability of the scheme, and I think on that basis I would be more comfortable if we were then to take that back to the applicant.
Just on that, what you're saying is we could do a minded, if the committee was so minded, they could do a minded to approve, subject to, and then, yes, okay. Councillor Napton. Okay. Councillor Cross.
I think it should come back to this committee, you know what I mean? Because we are responsible for actually making sure that it is right and that it does meet NDSS, not.
Councillor Cross, let's see how things pan out. Councillor Napton.
I'm thinking, Chairman, that if we are minded to do that, isn't it best to do it now and say, because obviously if this is going to come back to us, it's better that we hear the whole application in its entirety with the speakers, etc., with the correct plans in front of us. So with that in mind, I will propose that we defer this so the plans can be amended, so the application in front of us is the correct application and everybody gets a say on that application. Otherwise, we'll have speakers today speaking on one application, and then if that was the case, we'd be bringing back effectively a different application next time. So I think the whole thing will get very fragmented.
My only concern is that we're just concentrating on one bit of this application and there's the rest of the application to look at. So before we move to deferral, let's look at it as a whole holistically. And then if there's anything else, the time to do that is at the end to say, right, we need X, Y and Z looked at, rather than just deferring on the national space standards.
It should be said as well that whilst it's obviously better to have a property go beyond the space standards, the policy support depends on those on them meeting the space standards, not necessarily going beyond them. So whilst it would be good to encourage that, it's not something that in terms of in a policy context that we could insist on.
Councillor Burr.
Yes, if I could just come in there, whilst I understand that Councillor Napton is trying to be proactive and wants to try and look at this in a different way, I do believe that we need to go through the process of, we've got an application in front of us, we need to deal with everything and then at the end come to the conclusion, which may be exactly the same, but I do think we need to go through the process, Chair.
Yeah, I agree. We seem to be concentrating on the residential bit, and there's the other bit to look at as well, and we need to cover all of it. If we're going to defer it, there may be other things to defer on this. Sorry.
Yeah, through you, Chair. I think we'd probably go to the speakers now and.
I've got other questions I need to ask. Sorry, Councillor Cross. Sorry. So I just want to cover, because there's a suggestion that we've got some overmassing here, and we've got the electrical contractor building next door, which is a massive building. So I need to cover that, please. We haven't discussed the signage at the front of the building, which is in a conservation area and a very prominent high street position. And I'd like the signage to be in keeping with the conservation area and the building that it's in. The building is a lovely building. It needs to be right. I've got the issue of burgage and whether it's appropriate to put the houses on the orientation that they are, or whether it needs to be swung around by 90 degrees to match the other development in the area. We haven't considered, and I hate to do this, biodiversity next gain, because I can't see any of it on this site. So there is none as far as I can see. And to come back, and I appreciate we can condition aluminium windows to be something else, etc. So there's a lot of things in there which we need to look at. Sorry.
But no, and I think particularly with regard to the orientation of the units and how it works within the built context that it's in. I think that's very much our approach, and it's also the approach that Historic England have identified in their consultation response, that in practice we are talking about a retail development in an area that has been identified as a space that should be supporting retail. The policy is clear about that, in that sort of thing enjoys support where it ties into that character, where it sits well within the area. In this case, it's a conservation area. So the general sense is that development is to be encouraged. However, this doesn't represent necessarily the best available or the best possible form of this particular development in this area. With regards to BNG, I think the applicant has claimed exemption on the basis that there's less than 25 square meters of viable habitat, which it is a car park. There's not a huge amount that will be growing there. So I think in terms of BNG, I think we can be reasonably satisfied that it's fine.
Gonna ask the speakers to come forward. The objection, which is Mrs. Bell, can come forward first. Mrs. Bell, if you look at the microphone pad, it's the green button to start the microphone, and you've got 5 minutes, Mrs. Bell, and I will be really strict with 5 minutes.
Right, so from our perspective, we're not against the actual development of a change of use. What we're against is the actual building, of the size of the building, and it's on an Edwardian stroke Victorian building. Now, Thirsk is a conservation area. We own 11 Marketplace, and we've had trouble getting UPVC heritage style windows even at the back of our premises. We've had planning granted for 17 windows, and they've all got to be wood, even at the back. And this is developing a big site, and it's in a conservation area. So if it was in a 1960s, 70s building, it wouldn't be a problem. But it is an absolutely beautiful building with high-pitched roofs, big tall chimneys, and it'd be very unfair to build on the back of that. Now, from our perspective, we see Thirsk as a conservation area. If it isn't a conservation area, then you're going to open up the precedence of other property owners in the marketplace wanting to put UPVC in, wanting to develop out the back. So I think that is one of the considerations. The other thing is the 18 roles now is like 35 roles. That is an awful lot of turnover per day to cover those wages. And I can't see, and I'm a business person, I cannot see how they will recruit 35 roles to work into that property. That is an awful lot of footfall to come into Thirsk. There's not enough car parking in Thirsk. Millgate car park, the local residents don't use it because it's too expensive. They use the marketplace, or they'll go and use Tesco. So from our perspective, the economic benefit, yes, 35 roles now would be good for Thirsk, but how is a business going to make that amount of turnover to cover its staff costs? And I can't see how it'll do that initially in the first 3 years of it actually being there. It might never, ever recruit that amount of staff because of the turnover point. And it'll take quite some time to get the bottom line to make a profit. And the other thing is that the independents, it's a discount store, a big discount store. It will undercut all the independents that are there. So what will happen to Thirsk then? When the small independents can't make a living, they will close up. I think that is my point. Sorry. So that's it. Thank you. Okay.
Chair, can I address some of those? So I think some of the staff, it said the bulk of them to come from Thirsk. The impression I've got is that some of them will be recruited via of the central business. So presumably costs will be tied into, some of the staff costs will be tied into the wider business rather than necessarily profit generated from or operating costs associated with this unit as such. Sorry. In terms of impact on other businesses within Thirsk, the overall floor space, when you include the first floor element, I think the solicitors, etc., is pushing 1,000 square meters. My understanding is that it's not over 1,000 square meters. My understanding is where a retail application comes in in a town centre or adjacent to a town centre. Correct me if I'm wrong, Peter. That is over 1,000 square meters that would normally require a retail assessment in order to ensure that no harm was caused to existing business within the site. This isn't. This doesn't trigger that, so we don't know if it will have an impact. It may not do. It may augment the town centre, but it's not something that really we've been able to ask at present.
Thanks, Connor. Right, Councillor Dabb, you have your opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. You've got 5 minutes, Councillor Dabb.
Okay, I'm going to be very, very brief. I've been listening to the questions and I've also just listened to the objector. The objector, of course, has a similar, smaller unit, the other side of the marketplace. I do accept that it would need to be placed upon the use of material and the likes, which I think has been agreed could be conditioned should the committee be minded to approve. So that is not really, in my view, an objection that can't be mitigated. The rest of it from the previous speaker was, of course, about competition. I think it's already been stated that we've got to weigh, or I should say you as a committee have got to weigh up the benefits that this could provide in terms of economic benefits and footfall and employment and all the rest of that stuff. The alleged harm, I'll come on to the alleged harm as a principle shortly. And I would just urge you to do that. By not approving, we run the risk, and I say the risk, of having a building, prominent building, beautiful building that it is, in the centre of the marketplace, stood vacant and empty and going into dilapidations, in my view. We have an ideal golden opportunity with an application before us to try and work through some of those alleged harms to secure what we should be securing, which is the maintenance of Thirsk as an economically vibrant retail centre. And this does that. We're very fortunate, in my view, to have somebody willing to invest. I dare say $1 million plus. It won't be just a few £1,000 into an otherwise empty unit. We know what happens once the rot sets in. And I think we should grab that opportunity and try and deliver it. In terms of and I struggle to pronounce the expression because it's not a term that I and most people I've spoke to in Thirsk understand. Burbage, wherever it is, the line of sight from Chapel Street to the marketplace. I will contend that walking down Chapel Street, it's a mixed commercial and residential environment. There's been plenty of cases in the past of development on those so-called clear lines of sight. And I fail to understand why that is, personally, I fail to understand why that is such an important issue that nobody has ever raised within the town. The application has widespread support with just the one objection, I understand, from both the town council and many of the townsfolk that fail to understand why we're not trying to find a way of approving it. I'm not going to go on about the Burbage issue because I think it's slightly, if I may say, and respectfully say, it's slightly comical given the context of Chapel Street. Finally, in terms of deferment and the national, and I'm sorry, I'm planning. It's not my forte as such, and you will notice that I've never called an application in before. I do feel very, very strongly about the opportunity that this presents. But in terms of the national standards, I'm sure, and I take the point that perhaps we're going to have to give a deferment with a qualification on it, see if we can work through some of the issues, see if it's still viable. But I would just hope that the committee weighs up properly the economic benefit of an approval in principle or minded to approve, and see if we can get this national standard adhered to, if not surpassed. I don't think I have anything else to add. I'm sure committee members will make a considered decision, but I do actually respect what Councillor Burr, well, in fact, all the speakers have said in terms of the national standards. It would be easy, I think, for us, or I should say for the applicant, to come back with slightly amended plans to achieve that. And the prize would be immense. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chair and ladies and gentlemen. Can I just put to bed this thing about the NDSS? It was designed to that. There is obviously some confusion when we put plans in. There is some degree of change between them going to PDFs back to DWGs. I can assure you that the dimensions do add up to the minimum standard. If not, we can change that. I also would like to say that aluminium windows, we've not been approached during the application. We're quite happy to change those to timber. That's not a problem. Committee report raises concerns about overlooking a window in number 8 Chapel Street. The nearest window in the new flats is a bedroom and is 17 metres from that window. So that's that. Burgage plots. If you walk along Chapel Street, as members of the committee did on Monday, you'll see a hodgepodge of buildings and small spaces of differing sizes and heights and a multitude of materials. Will you see burgage plots? It is virtually impossible to discern them. They can only really be picked out from mapping or aerial photographs. The point is that the plots are now defined by the buildings on them, not by the plot boundaries. The current proposal follows this precedent. The Thirsk and Sowerby Conservation Area Appraisal makes no mention whatsoever of burgage plots. It does refer to this area south of the Market Square as service yards and indicates that they would benefit from development. The conservation area appraisal indicates the Chapel Street end of this site to be a potential area of improvement. Yorkshire Trading Company. The clue's in the name. This is a proud North Yorkshire family-run business with a local workforce approaching 600 staff. They've bucked the trend, not only surviving foot and mouth, COVID and economic downturns, but actually thriving and growing where other high street shops have disappeared. They're not a national conglomerate ready to close branches on a whim, but have a proven, sustainable business. Anxious to expand into Thirsk, they have been searching for a potential property here for over 20 years. For a store to be viable, they need sufficient space to merchandise their full range of products. This site will give them the floor space needed. Anything smaller, and they would not make this considerable investment. Yorkshire Trading will bring further footfall to the established businesses already trading there. Some of the smaller existing businesses may find that extra footfall to be the difference between failure and success. The store will, of course, be adding to local employment. Apart from new store members, the majority of whom will come from the town, support staff such as delivery drivers, retail area managers, warehouse team, admin support. Overall, we are looking at 35 jobs dependent on this development in Thirsk, not to mention the local builders and tradespeople needed for its construction. The upper floors are currently home to the solicitor's practice, Ecclesheadon, who have a need to increase their premises. They will be expanding into the existing offices formerly occupied by Barclays, keeping them in the town rather than their having to seek new premises elsewhere. The current Market Street frontage will be retained virtually unaltered. It is not easy to shoehorn a large shop into a confined site of this kind, but the advantage is that it will be accessible directly from the marketplace. The low pitched roof will be hidden by the two-storey frontage onto Chapel Street. This will add 2 residential units and will improve that part of the site in line with the conservation area appraisal. This development by a local, long-established company will bring increased footfall and greater employment, will keep shoppers local and will prevent another empty premises dotting the town. It will provide residential accommodation, keep a local business in the town, accommodate disabled shoppers, and can only be an asset to Thirsk. Better than a charity shop. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Are we in debate now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So it was a really interesting site visit on Monday. I think I've driven down the streets lots of times in my life, but never really paid attention to it. So walking it gave me a much better understanding of the situation. Hadn't quite realised how industrial it is and how industrial it has been in the past. And I'd not come across burgages like Councillor Dadd before, but Connor explained the what they were and the importance of them. Now, walking down the street, there are several sites where that context has been completely obliterated by the Victorians, a little Victorian terrace, I think, etc. And there are some plots where you can understand that layout. There are several plots where they have been developed at the back, reasonably modern 20th century development, where you can still see that plot layout. And there is, in my mind, no way that those plots could be further developed, and therefore that context stands. There's also the alleyways. I walked up and down a couple of the alleyways even after we had our meeting, and again you can see the layout there. So I don't think whatever effectively is done with this plot will mean that people cannot, if they wish, and you've got to look for it, understand that burgage layout. So I'm satisfied that that historical context will remain even if this development takes place. As to overlooking, I think the nearest window across the street is frosted glass, obscured glazing. Assume it's a bathroom, and it's a long way from the windows, especially when you put it in a town context. So I have no problem. I don't think that's an issue whatsoever. I think that, and I get the feeling from the applicant that the aluminium windows, which I don't think would be appropriate, can be conditioned as timber windows. So I think that's an easy fix. But now we come to the National Space Standards, and this is one of my sort of pets, really. And I agree with Councillor Cross that we need quality accommodation. And when you think back to the 60s, Parker Morris setting the initial sort of standards, and we're 50, 60 years on from that now. I do not want to see a creep backwards. I understand that this may be a technical issue around the transfer from DWGs to PDFs, etc., etc. My proposal would be that we need to, well, however we do this, we need to see clear plans with clear measurements on, which I think Connor alluded to. So if the measurements can be put onto the plans so that the officers can confidently make those calculations. But I do want this committee to see those plans, because I think it's so important that we meet these minimum standards. So for me, it's the space standards I want to see addressed. If they're addressed, I would be minded to move to approve this application, Chairman. However, we do that.
Councillor Lapson. Councillor Burr.
Thank you, Chairman. So my role as a councillor is to look after Malton Town. And I didn't go to the site visit because I know Thirsk very, very well. Part of my previous job role was to support small businesses in the Thirsk area. And I've looked for parking and I've driven round Thirsk, and I do know the back streets of Thirsk. And I do think it's important that we do listen to local speakers. However, what I do feel as a councillor is that we really do need to be pushing for investment in our towns and in our town centres. I really do passionately feel it's vital, not just for Thirsk, but for any of our towns. I also think that the shortage of accommodation is really a pressing issue, and it's vital that we look seriously into this. And the reason that I raised the point about the size of the bedrooms is that the data is showing that single people are desperate for one bedrooms. So that is where I'm coming from about the one bedroom aspect. There's no doubt that our high streets are going through really challenging times, probably due to the economic climate and definitely due to the internet, and jobs are scarce. But our main priority as councillors is to look after the majority of our residents and what our residents need and our towns to thrive. Now, our officers have put forward a compelling case, which I certainly do respect. But as a businesswoman myself, and secondly a councillor, I think I need to be pragmatic in our approach. And I've been thinking and I've been listening about the jobs that are created, and they could be controversial about the jobs, but I would suspect they are probably part-time jobs as opposed to 35 full-time. But that's just my business hat coming on. But we could ask for that detail in the report. So I'd like this council to be progressive. And also I would just like to point out I work in Scarborough. And regarding the parking, it has been brought up. There's parking issues all over, but we live rurally, so we have to use our cars. But maybe, moving forward, we can start using public transport if there is any, and do car shares. We need to push that. But I do think that we as a committee can't say that we can't approve something because there's not enough parking. That's just my opinion. I've read it carefully. I noticed that the town council supports this, and I think it's really important we listen to the town council. They're usually the guys on the ground. They live, work in the area, and they know what the local people want. The BNG has been brought up. I'm quite happy with that. I haven't got a problem with that. And I think this Burbridge, whatever it is, I think it's an absolute curveball because I think it's out of date. Who cares? Who knows what it is? And I think it's been smashed anyway. So I'm happy that it's not fit for purpose, and we really should give it a small amount of thought. So the last thing I wanted to say is that I get this all the time about traders wanting to, stamp down on competition, and we can't have one of those because we've got one of those. Well, unfortunately, this committee, someone who's been on a planning committee for probably too long, we aren't here to decide on who gets what. It's a free competition out there, so we can't say anything about that. So to wrap up, I personally want to support this scheme. I want to support the investment. I want that building to be brought back into use. I want some jobs created, but I do want that dwelling sorted out. I would like to move a deferral, but we're minded to. Yes, well, he didn't say deferral, he just said approve. So I would. Yeah, so he said it at the beginning, which you did, Councillor Napton, but that wasn't in the actual context. So I need to just correct that because you said approval. So we need to.
It was that he moved a deferral, and I asked him to wait for other information. If you want to second that, I've got no problem with that, but a deferral has been moved.
Well, I'm not going to argue today about the protocol, but that was before we went into debate. And I'm only saying that I would challenge that out of this, and I would like our solicitor, because that was discussed and I have no problem with it. But I'm just saying, Councillor Napton, and I agree with him, I'm going to second him. We're talking about words now. He said approval, but we don't want approval. We want deferral to approve. That's what our officers asked us. Yeah, and I'd like to make the changes to the windows, the wooden windows.
The response from the council solicitor is that she's happy. Councillor Apton said he wanted to see the measurements, etc., on the plans, and he was moving a deferral. So we are happy that he's moved that deferral. So no, he said he would be minded to approve. He didn't say he would approve, but he said he would, and he'd moved a deferral. Let's go with Councillor Apton's moved a deferral. I'm happy if you wish to second it, Lindsay.
Back and bite us. I wanted us to follow procedure. So more than happy to second that. And also, I think we should obviously listen to the division member. His input is really important as well. I'm more than happy to second that for all those reasons.
Just to clarify that the motion was to defer for reasons in relation to the clarification on the NDSS measurements. That was the only reason I think Councillor Napton put forward for.
Yeah, so that's correct. Obviously, I mentioned as Councillor Burr has about conditioning the windows, but the actual motion was to defer it to get amended plans showing that the space standards. This happens all the time, Chairman. We went through this at a cabinet the other day about the technology in here. It keeps going on and off. It's not satisfactory. I need something done about it. Coming back to the point, Yep. So I was proposing that we defer it in order to get plans with the correct measurements on the plans, so that the officers can do the calculations and give us advice on whether it has met the space standards or not.
As far as I'm aware, the motion was to defer. The motion was to defer pending confirmation of the space standard and the measurements. We're now at a situation where we don't have another proposal yet about whether we should approve or not, or refuse or not. The motion that we got was to defer. You can second it, or you can do a minded to approve if that's what you want to do. But the initial proposal was to defer.
Could just come back. So as I say, I don't want to cause any problems here. I'm just trying to make it quite clear what this committee is doing. We were advised by our officers to defer this with a minded to approve. Councillor Napton said he wanted to approve. I just for clarity said we need to defer this but we are minded to approve. I am just following instruction.
Right, so speaking to the council solicitor, we can defer it so that we can get the right measurements, or we can do a minded to approve. You can't defer with a mind to approve. You either defer or you are minded to approve. Sorry, Peter.
So on the face of it, if members were satisfied that we're probably there in terms of NDSS, we could simply go back and check that. If it does comply, then we could then proceed to deal with it under our delegated powers and issue a positive decision. If members, however, wish to see that information to understand exactly what it means in terms of the NDSS, then we would need to defer the matter and bring it back to you with those details.
Would be my advice to consider the deferral in line with the Constitution, given that
Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. There's a lot of public benefits to this scheme. We've heard, very eloquently laid out this morning in terms of the employment and the economic benefits. The new accommodation in the town centre, much sought after, probably likely to appeal to younger people, perhaps single people, of which there's a shortage. There's not been mentioned, actually. I understand the existing solicitors building business premises is going to expand as well, so there's a business benefit there as well for the solicitors. We seem to have got very wrapped up in a technical issue around the national space standards, which seems to be the one stumbling block. I mean, I take Councillor Cross's point about wanting to see that in person, but I personally have confidence in our officers. I think on a technical matter like this, they are qualified people. We're not, we're lay people, they are qualified. So I have every confidence that they can have oversight on that, and provided they're satisfied that we can pass this scheme. So if I'm correct here, I would actually like to put an alternative proposal forward, that we are minded to approve this with delegated powers to the officers to deal with the technical points.
Thank you for that. Councillor Bay. Sorry, Connor, did you want to come back?
Yes, please. Sorry. No.
Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair. I'm familiar with this company. I was originally from Driffield, and I gathered that's where this company had its roots back in the day. And they've now grown to be quite a big company. I perhaps should have declared I volunteer at Thirsk Tourist Information. That's got no impact, I don't think, on this application. But I'm mindful of how vibrant a market town Thirsk is and of the fact that it is a tourist destination. My neighbouring councillor, Councillor Dadds, has said how detrimental to this market town it would be to have an empty building. So from that point of view, I am really pleased that this is being done sympathetically from the marketplace point of view. I agree with you, Chair, that I think with a few tweaks, I think that's probably the word, or looking at it again, I would like to see the residential bit turn through 90 degrees with a space in front of it at the Chapel Street end of the site. I think that would enhance the application, and at the same time they could address the size of the flats, size of the residential units. So I think I would agree with my colleagues who've said a deferment so that some of these could be addressed. It is so nearly there, and and I think it is a positive application for Thirsk, but it needs one or two things looking at and addressing the issues that we've got with it.
Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor Baker on what's been said. I think we should be moved forward. I think we'd seem to defer a lot, actually. And I think my concern is NDSS is what it's all about, actually, to be quite honest. You know what I mean? We want people living in quality houses. And you know what I mean, if we can't work towards that, and by increasing an extra 0.5 metre saying, oh, it is acceptable, is absolutely rubbish. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? They've got to be a decent size. You know what I mean? If you go back to your police house in Councillor Taylor in Filey, you know what I mean, it more than complied with NDSS, you know what I mean? And, you know, we look at our own homes, you know what I mean, they're more than comply with it. And, you know, 70 square metres is nothing. It's 8.5 metres, you know what I mean, or 20 odd foot. It's nothing. And we really do need to get quality properties, and we can start with this one. I don't mind if it's a 1-bedroom flat, you know what I mean, and it's that size. I'm quite happy with that, you know what I mean, but to show on an extra 0.5 and give it to thingy, this is not what it's about. This is going forward. You know what I mean? We don't want people living in ghettos, because that's all it'll become, 4 people in 70 square metres. Could you imagine it? You know, absolutely ridiculous. So that's what I'm concerned about. You know what I mean? And I hope the applicant, architect, is here and is listening to that. And we've got to make a stand somewhere. And we did make a stand. We did start to make a stand in Scarborough against it. And I want, you know, the chair of the committee and the deputy chair to move things forward, to actually start making sure when we do the revised planning for North Yorkshire, we have this super duper plan, that we actually up these standards to make them, you know, livable, because it's not quality. It's living in a box. So yeah, I'm minded to approve it, but you know what I mean, my total feeling would be, you know what I mean, if you don't get it to 75 at least, you know what I mean, you know, you make it a 1-bedroom flat. And I just hope the applicant's architect is here listening. And if we don't start making a stand soon, when are we going to make a stand? Thank you.
Councillor Andrews.
Thank you. I mean, it seems pretty obvious around the room that we want this to go ahead with some small tweaks. I want to add another thing to the speaker that was for approval of the application did mention the aluminium windows, and they will it seems they're open to negotiations on this, and I'll leave it up to you, Chair, and how we go through this, because I know there's ever so many different things. Some haven't been seconded on the floor, but I think as long as we get the windows, the NDSS measurements, and I think Councillor Baker mentioned something. I mean, I don't know how rotating. I don't know how big a deal that will be, but I would be happy with the windows and the thing. And if Councillor Baker still wants that in there, that I think it does need to come back to committee to look at, because I think that's a bit more than just what they agreed to it when they were speaking. So I'll leave the chair and the legal and the planning officer to decide how we're going to move forward on that one. Thank
you. Peter.
Yeah, I mean, my view is that the NDSS issue and the windows are certainly matters that we can deal with within the framework of the application and within the framework of the determination of the application to date. I think if we were looking at a change to the orientation of the building, it's okay, so it could be dealt with within the concept of this current planning application, but we would be a redesign. We'll be back to carrying out notifications locally and such like. So it would certainly be a how can I put it, a more complicated process than simply a few tweaks. You know, it would be a fairly significant change to the scheme.
So, I've got some issues here, and a lot of them you've already picked up. So I'm very pleased with the employment aspect of this application. I'm very pleased that we are bringing a new retailer into the marketplace, when in actual fact our marketplaces, our town centres are struggling to have retailers who are willing to come in and open up. There are far too many, whether they're independent or otherwise, they don't have to be independent these days, units who are actually pulling out of our marketplace, and I've got no doubt that's due to online retail. The addition of residential accommodation gives us an opportunity for some nighttime economy, which I think supports the local restaurants, public houses, etc. in the area, which hasn't been picked up at the minute. But there are also some issues with this application, and like everything else, this is about a balance. I definitely don't want to see aluminium windows in a conservation area. It's definitely not appropriate. I am concerned about the advertising signage in the marketplace, given its conservation status, etc. I think it needs to be in keeping with the building and with the marketplace and with the conservation area. Orientation, I'll accept that it's not such an easy thing to change, but if you look at the whole town, and I walked a number of the different snickelways when I was in the area, like Councillor Napton, I parked at the nursery end of Chapel Street and made a long walk up that, and was particular to look at what was going on in terms of the street views and the look into the burgage areas. I accept it would be a complete redesign. So it's got a huge amount going for it, but there are some negatives in this, and I'm not quite sure. I'm still not convinced what the right way to deal with these things is. My feeling is, and I know it's been moved and seconded for deferral, I would be happier probably to defer this, to give the officers and the applicants the opportunity to address some of these things. National space standards are a real issue for me. We need to be building quality accommodation, and no disrespect, I know but this is a minimum, and we don't even seem to be reaching the minimum. If the 1-bedroom units, fine. If the 2-bedroom units, it needs to be bigger. So I think we're at that point where I'd be uncomfortable, no disrespect to our officers, they are really good at their jobs, I would be uncomfortable doing a minded to approve, and I would be probably supportive of deferral. So, all that having been said, has everybody said what they want to say? It has been moved and seconded for deferral, but it's only been moved with a minded to approve with delegation to officers. So I'm going to take the first one, which is deferral. So I'm going to ask, sorry, do you want to come in?
Yeah, just can we just clarify just so we're all clear that the motion to defer and the reasons surrounding it, so we're all.
Okay, so I'm going to pick that up. So the motion to defer is based on national space standard as being not adequate. Aluminium windows, signage at the front of the building. Do jump in if you want anything else here, members. I think that covers. Oh, and we wanted to look at the possible rotation of the building. Sorry, Lindsay, did you have something else? Yeah, that was national space standards. No, the rotation of the dwellings. Yeah. Anything else, members? No, that's it. Thank you. So it's been moved and seconded for deferral. I'm going to ask members to vote those for deferral, please. Okay, that's unanimous. It's deferred. Thank you.